edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And your co-host, Anton Paras here.
This is a bit of an emergency episode, Anton. We haven't done one of these in a while.
I know, and it's so fun to be able to do these. I feel like being able to just have some fresh takes for some emergency episodes is always a nice, fun treat for the fans.
And by emergency, we don't mean anything's wrong. This is just simply a film that was released yesterday. We haven't done one of these in a while. It's been about a year since we last did an in-theater release. That was Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Although we did do The Killer last Thanksgiving, but of course that was a Netflix-only release. So it was much easier to watch. I didn't have to get off my couch.
Yeah, and this actually takes some effort to get up, go to the theater, grab some popcorn, and enjoy, as they always say, the silver screen. So let's not bury the lead. What are we going over today?
Inside Out 2.
Ooh, Pixar.
Always fun to cover a Pixar film. Really quick, before I forget, I thought they were getting rid of that dumb Nicole Kidman ad at the AMC theaters, but nope, they're still running it.
No, it just resonates with people too much.
That's why I went. I was just hoping they hadn't retired it yet.
I love the memes that people have done with that, where she's saying all of her very cheesy lines, but then on the screen it's just the worst stuff.
Yeah, it's I think they need to just drop it. It's a way to cut out 90 seconds of your viewing experience.
How long were previews for you? Was it about like 20 minutes?
Yeah, about.
Yeah, 20 minute previews always take a lot longer than I expect.
I saw this Thursday night and I don't even remember a single one of the previews.
Yeah, no, just not necessarily anything I'm excited for.
No. To be fair, it was mostly kids' movies, if I recall.
Well, not only are there previews, but there's also like commercials.
Right. Always a Coca-Cola commercial.
Yep. Or even at the theater that we go to, there's before previews commercials that they're running in the theater before everything runs. And it's just, they're really sending a lot of ads in. But we could also submit local ads for movie theaters.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even know that was a thing, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into the discussion about this film, we have some admin to take care of. This has been a long time coming, but we have finally launched our Patreon, which, of course, we have announced this publicly via Twitter and on one of our YouTube message things that you post on YouTube. So yeah, we've been teasing this pretty much all last season, but the Patreon is finally live. We have the tiers set up. Keep in mind that some of this may be subject to change, depending on the interest and the level of demand and participation that we get. We may tweak this. So stay tuned, right? We're brand new to Patreon. We don't even know if there's enough interest in the Patreon, but we have gotten enough questions about it that we're willing to try it. So yeah, that's what brings us here.
And we appreciate every listener, every supporter. And this is really just a way to show us if you really, really enjoy what you're listening to. And we appreciate that, any contribution on Patreon.
Indeed. And look, I think we've mentioned this before, but it is worth bringing up again. The main takeaway is if you do not choose to become a Patreon, you are not going to miss out on our regularly scheduled episodes. We are still going to be covering a film once a week. It's still going to come out on Wednesdays. So if you don't want to invest in us, that's fine. You'll still get the regular episodes. The point is, the more you participate in the Patreon, the more benefits, the more exclusive content you may get access to. But if you want to get to know us a little better and get a little bit of extra content, please join. And without further ado, we're going to give a quick rundown of the tiers. So obviously you can join for free on Patreon. However, you're not going to get any benefit out of that other than giving us another number to work with. But for $2 a month, you are going to get all of our episodes ad-free when applicable and a whole week early. So for $2 a month, you're going to hear no ads on future episodes. By the way, I'm not going back and editing all of the ads out in the old episodes. So I'm not willing to do that. But more importantly, you're going to get next week's episode a week early. For $5 a month, you, of course, get all of the $2 benefits, plus supporter shout-outs on every season recap, plus special episodes. We've gotten some interest in perhaps doing a mailbag episode. We've gotten some interest in perhaps doing a bit of a ranking episode. So more to come there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for $10 a month, you get all of the $5 benefits, plus Patreon exclusive episodes like season recaps. But more importantly, revisiting earlier films upon request.
Wow. All this value?
Yes, all this value can be yours for $10 a month. Yeah, so we have gotten some interest in revisiting films from the past, specifically like stuff from season 1 and season 2, when we were really still finding our footing. So we may end up doing some of those again.
But wait, there's more.
There is more. For $20 a month, you're going to get all of those $10 benefits, plus boosted requests from supporters. Now, what does this mean? If you are a Patreon subscriber and you pay us $20 a month, we will cover a film of your choosing that very same season. How exciting is that? Note that this is going to be limited to one supporter per season, meaning you can't give us a dozen films and expect us to cover it all in the same season. We can't do that. We will do one film of your choosing per season. 2 if we're nice.
I think that this is a really fun opportunity for any of our listeners that I would definitely jump on if I wasn't on the show.
Me too. Now, a good question is, well, what are you going to do if you get enough of these? How do you select which ones you do? If we get enough of these, we will do a vote for the Patreon. So the people that have contributed on this $20 tier, they will get to vote. I suppose they're probably all going to vote for the film that they want, but look, we'll cross that bridge if we get there. Now, if that gets big enough where this becomes a regular thing that's being requested of us, then we'll explore the possibility of doing more than just 1 or 2 per season.
So, listeners, if you really want us to cover a movie that you love, it's at the $20 tier. So,
yeah. And worth pointing out, for $10 a month, we can revisit an old film, right? $20 a month, you can give us an old film if you want us to cover it again.
Exactly.
Obviously, if you want us to cover something that we covered like a couple weeks before, probably not very likely. But
but if you want us to cover Shrek 3 over and over and over again,
if you're willing to pay, we'll do it.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's it for the Patreon. Like we said, we just launched this the other day, so we may end up tweaking some of this. We don't know. We've never used Patreon before. This is new to us, and we're really excited to see what it brings. But again, worth reiterating, this will not interrupt our regularly scheduled episodes. Have no fear. If you are a free listener, wherever you get your podcasts, you're going to get the same podcast every week. Don't worry about that. Anton, I want to talk about some current event stuff because we rarely get to do this.
Let's do it. Let's jump in. Breaking news.
We often try to avoid making any kind of current topical references on the podcast. Reason being is that we record these things usually so far in advance, but that by the time we mention something, it's outdated by weeks or sometimes months.
Yeah, premonitions like the Golden State Warriors are going to win the NBA Finals.
Right, which is just silly. I made an equally silly prediction that the Denver Nuggets would be defending their title in the finals. Although I don't know if that was a silly prediction. I like their chances.
I think that was a smart decision at the time.
But speaking of the NBA Finals, the Dallas Mavericks have staved off elimination last night by blowing out the Boston Celtics. This thing is going to go at least 5.
And the Boston Celtics were just looking a bit worn that game. But
yeah, they didn't show up.
That's why they call it a gentleman's sweep.
Right.
If happens how we think it's going to happen.
But I don't see a scenario where Boston loses this.
No team's ever come back from being down 3-0.
No.
So.
No, it's true. I got to say, though, I've been really disappointed in the Mavericks considering how they handled themselves against Minnesota.
I feel like it's just one of those things where once you get to a matchup in the postseason, or once you get to a matchup in the postseason that you're just not prepared for, whether it's like player by player, coaching, experience in the postseason, which Dallas does not have a ton of experience in the postseason.
No, they don't. But this should be, when is Game 5? Sunday?
Sunday.
Yeah, this should be over tomorrow, so I'll be watching.
Yeah, we shall see.
And of course, the Euros kicked off
Yes.
yesterday. Germany absolutely hammered Scotland. And this is one of my favorite sporting events to
Mhm.
watch. I think it's every bit as good as the World Cup, although there isn't quite anything like the World Cup. I think the quality of play that you see can sometimes be even better than the World Cup.
So, especially when we think of just the Euros and just it's a very personal tournament, right? Because there's a national allegiance goes very strong, especially in Europe.
Yeah, and as an American, I have no horse in this race, although, my ancestors are mostly from Germany and Ireland. Ireland's a bit tricky to root for in the Euros because they're never in the Euros. So, Germany has historically been a team that I've supported for the most part. I'm just hoping for a good tournament. I'm actually kind of hoping for a France-England final. I think that
Oh,
would be really cool. I don't know if that's going to be possible based on the draw, but
mhm.
that would be like my dream final for this
Excellent.
tournament. I think they are, for the most part, the two best teams in it. France probably has the most talent, and I would say anything less than a semifinal for them would be a disappointment.
Who's the dark horse in the race?
I almost want to say Belgium. I know
Okay.
they have a lot of great players, but it seems like a lot of folks have written them off, especially after how poorly they did at the last World Cup. The so-called golden generation.
Mhm.
When they went out at the group stage at the World Cup in Qatar, a lot of pundits were saying that the golden generation is over and you can write them off. But it would not surprise me if they went on a run here.
Very nice. And I mean, not too far from now, of course, we do have the Copa.
That's right. I think that starts next week. There, of course, that's in the States.
Yes.
They are
We have
playing at least one game here in Charlotte. I can't afford to go. It's a lot of money.
we have a couple games by me here in the Bay Area. So,
Guessing
literally
it's have you
right there.
didn't you look into going? It's like just
And
you're like, okay, that's
it w
sticker shock.
it is pretty high, pretty steep. I think the cheapest ticket right now listed, because I checked recently, was 800 range.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah, you can watch on TV then.
yeah.
Back to the Euros real quick. I want to get these thoughts out because I don't have many opportunities to do something like this on the podcast. I like to give my breakdown. So we talked about France, Belgium. England has a great chance to win. I do think there's some questions about their defense that need answering. They're a bit top heavy, but I am rooting for them, having just been to England recently. I had a wonderful time there.
Mhm.
Now, the hosts, Germany, I don't know what to expect. I don't know where a lot of the goals are going to come from, despite what they did to Scotland last night. But you always have to like their chances. I really like their
Yeah.
manager, Julian Nagelsmann.
Mhm.
It's kind of funny how he's like our age. Don't see a lot of
Yeah.
managers our age be this,
Young, very young.
yeah, very young for a very high profile job, right? Portugal have a really well balanced squad. They have a chance to win this as well. It's interesting how they'll handle Cristiano Ronaldo, who, at this point in his career,
Mhm.
he's not the player that he was, but
No, but,
he's still an exceptional finisher. He just doesn't have the legs to play full 90 minutes.
he's going to, of course, draw a crowd, and
Oh, of course. Yeah. Spain, they have a lot of talent, but I need to see them make a deep run before I can trust them.
Mhm.
They've disappointed at the last few tournaments. Now, I think our soccer fan listeners are probably wondering why we haven't talked about Italy yet. They are the holders. They are capable of winning this tournament again, but this is the most Jekyll and Hyde team in the tournament.
Mhm.
They didn't qualify for the past two World Cups, yet they somehow managed to win the Euros in between them, which doesn't make any sense.
Interesting to think about, and they
Yeah.
do play well together,
Oh, yeah. But they didn't
but
qualify for
but
the
but they
past two
don't
World
qualify,
Cups. It
yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
Uh,
So I'm really looking forward to this tournament. I'm going to watch as much of it as I can.
mhm.
No offense to the Copa America, but the Euros is far more exciting in my opinion.
Well, we have a lot of even when we look at the, Premier League, these are the top tier players are playing in the Euros, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a ton of talent in South America, but
Right.
apart from Argentina and Brazil and maybe a couple of others, it's the teams are just they are better in Europe. It's nothing.
Mhm.
I don't think that's a hot take to say that.
Yeah, we have, of course, like, when I think about anything similar for the US, I mean, whenever the NBA or whenever the US goes into international play for basketball, they dominate.
Yeah, I think yeah we do. There's some really good teams though. internationally. The Olympics are going to be fun to watch this year. And we didn't even talk about the Olympics.
It's true.
I think that's enough sports talk, unless you have anything to add. The Yankees are on a tear, by the way. Crushing it.
The Giants
it's only July, or it's only June. Who cares?
The Giants are still injured, but like you said, it's still June. We'll see what happens.
Long season with this goofy extra wild card format, you never know what mediocre team can get in.
Okay,
not sure why we need 162 games with that format, but that's a whole nother conversation.
All right, current event topics. How popular is pickleball now?
I don't know.
It's very popular. It's not only being played in schools, but there are just a lot of places where they're converting tennis courts into pickleball courts. They have like whole sections in like Target that are just pushing pickleball fashion and accessories. So pickleball is everywhere right now. I haven't played it yet, but I feel like I'm probably going to start soon.
That's very exciting.
I'd say check it out, Pat. Pickleball, it baffles me how popular it's getting.
The level of enthusiasm that you have at this time of the morning is admirable, sir. Just in case the listeners don't know, which of course, how could they? It's 5 a.m. for Anton.
Oh, but is there a stark difference between 5 a.m. me and not 5 a.m. me?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't live with you.
That's fair. Well, like I said, I have the enthusiasm for the show, so I'm sure that helps perk me up this early.
And the coffee.
Yeah, that helps.
All right, well, enough pickleball talk. Let's talk about this movie.
Jump in.
Inside Out 2. Riley is now a teenager, and her mind's headquarters is undergoing a sudden demolition to make room for something entirely unexpected. New emotions. Joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, who've long been running a successful operation by all accounts, aren't sure how to feel when anxiety shows up, and it looks like she's not alone. Inside Out was released yesterday on June 14th, 2024 by Pixar Animation Studios and Walt Disney Pictures. Directed by Kelsey Mann, screenplay by Meg LaFave and Dave Holstein. Voiced by Amy Poehler, Phyllis Smith, Lewis Black, Tony Hale, Liza Lapira, Maya Hawke, Ayo Edebiri, Adele Exarchopoulos, Diane Lane, Kyle MacLachlan, Paul Walter Hauser, and Kensington Talman. The budget is $175 million. And the box office, as of now, 36 hours after release, $28 million. We are on pace for a $100 million opening weekend. Anton, why was this movie chosen?
Always love our episodes where we're able to go to something in theaters. It's always fun to go in with some fresh perspective, a fresh take. And you and I both talked about this. We love Pixar. We really do appreciate the quality of the films that they put out. We know that they have their periods of high quality and then periods where it was a bit more inconsistent. So with that kind of pedigree, it's always fun to think about how is the current perception going to be, and how will it be once we start to look at some of their older films and now something in theaters. Inside Out, of course, is a pretty, I'd say it was a pretty big movie on its release, and definitely has a very strong critical reception, did really great in theaters. We'll go into more about our personal feelings about the series, but I feel like this was a really great candidate because of where it sits among not only animated films, but films for Disney in general.
Definitely. There's a lot of hype for this sequel. And I think you undersold just how successful Inside Out was when it came out in 2015. It is probably one of, if not the most highly regarded Pixar film of the 2010s. Apart from perhaps Coco, would you say?
That's a very, very true. I think part of it is, we'll touch on it, personal preference, but yes, critically and commercially, it did very well.
It made over $800 million at the box office, and I think it has something like a 98% Rotten Tomatoes score. So you can't do much better there. I saw it shortly after it was in theaters on some kind of streaming service. Disney Plus didn't exist back then, so I'm assuming it would have been Netflix, maybe Hulu. But the film was rightfully praised for giving an accurate depiction of mental health, especially when it concerns children. The relationship between humans and their emotions. It was just a very clever story. Now, full disclosure, I like the first Inside Out, I don't love it.
Yeah.
Now, I'll get into that a little bit more. I by no means think it is a bad movie. In fact, rewatching it just the other day to prepare for this, I think it's quite good. I don't love it like I do some other Pixar films, which again, we'll get into this. But the 2010s was an interesting decade for Pixar, right? You had, especially the past few years, as we have gotten into the 2020s, they have not been as successful as some of their earlier periods. Now, part of that, I think, can be blamed on the global pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there has been a perceived decline in quality in their more recent material. I'm not sure how fair that is, partly because of you can't just look at the box office numbers, again, because of the pandemic. I also haven't seen a lot of their more recent films, so I don't really know how to judge them. Just a quick recap. Onward was a box office bomb. That came out, I think, in the very, very early days of the pandemic in 2020.
Yeah, and that one went definitely suffered from direct to streaming.
Yeah. Soul, I really liked. I saw that. It was a big critical hit. That's the only one that I've seen of these films. But again, it was released direct to streaming during the pandemic. It lost money. Luca was streaming only. Turning Red, that was really well received, but it is apparently the biggest box office bomb of all time.
Again, I think that was also during the pandemic timeline of things just opening up.
Yeah. Take all this with huge grains of salt. I mean, again, Lightyear lost the studio over $100 million. Now, Elemental, which was released last year, that was considered a return to form. I didn't see it. I know you did, and you really liked it.
Yeah, I remember I was talking that up after I saw it, and I texted you just because I was surprised by what I saw. I definitely had different expectations going in, and a lot of what I've read is they marketed that film pretty poorly.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but it is a movie that we are going to cover on the podcast at some point. But I think, long story short, Pixar needs Inside Out 2 to be a hit.
Yep. And fair to say, when we look at where it's projected to be for the opening box office, not too shabby. So
no, but Pixar, a lot of changes in the past few years too. John Lasseter, who was the longtime head of the studio, right? He was pushed out in 2018 during the Me Too movement. Pete Docter, who directed the first Inside Out as well as other films, right? I think he co-wrote the first film too. It was basically his idea, but he's now running the studio. A sequel was inevitable, right?
Right.
I know that they had been trying to get this made for a long time, just like the first one took years to develop. And so far, this has gotten really stellar reviews. This currently sits at a 92% Rotten Tomatoes score. So, at least from a critical perspective, this is doing very, very well.
Yeah. So right now, Pixar must be feeling pretty good. Disney must be feeling pretty good after only a couple days.
Okay. Production history, not a ton here, so we can just breeze through this. And again, this is one of the things about doing a brand new movie. The production history, there's sometimes not a ton of information. So shortly after the release of the first film, Pete Docter was thinking about ideas for a sequel, but nothing got off the ground until fairly recently. Pixar officially confirmed the sequel was going to happen at the D23 Expo announcement in September 2022. Amy Poehler was going to be coming back. She came on stage to discuss the film alongside Docter.
Pat, are you familiar with D23?
Vaguely.
Right, so it's basically Disney's version of Comic-Con, and it's their opportunity to just unveil everything, whether it's new in the parks, new across their different properties, being able to hint at new technologies, or just anything that they really want to get in front of like these very, very hungry Disney fans. So it's their big unveiling event, and actually it's coming up this month.
Seems like it would be cool to go to.
Oh, huge. It's in Anaheim. It's always just a really fun opportunity to just see what is the latest and cutting edge from Disney and what are they announcing.
Maybe someday we'll make it there.
Yes.
Ultimately, Kelsey Mann was chosen to direct Inside Out 2. This would be his feature-length directorial debut. Screenwriter Meg LaFave was announced to be returning from co-writing the first one. Now, to utilize, quote, truthful world building, Mann used Docter's 5 to 27 emotions idea from the first film that he pitched during its production.
So Mann's first pass included 9 new emotions to make Joy feel overwhelmed with all the new emotions showing up, but felt that the story couldn't keep track with so many emotions taking the spotlight or not adding to the story. So after the first screening, he decided to simplify the number. Among those emotions was schadenfreude, having joy at someone's expense, jealousy, and guilt, but the latter two influenced the film despite being removed, with man feeling that envy could relate to jealousy and how remnants of guilt could be found within anxiety's introduction, even giving anxiety some of guilt's baggage, which was inspired by that of Disneyland hotels. Amy Poehler received $5 million plus bonuses to reprise her role as Joy. Phyllis Smith and Louis Black also reprised their roles from the first films, voicing sadness and anger, respectively. Now, Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling both declined to return as Fear and Disgust after a dispute over salaries emerged. I'm not convinced that Mindy Kaling was barred from the set after releasing season 2 of Velma. In November 2023, with the release of the teaser trailer, it was revealed that Tony Hale and Liza Lapira would replace Hader and Kaling. Maya Hawke was cast as Anxiety, a new character. In March 2024, with the release of the second trailer and poster, it was revealed that Andrea Datzman had composed the film score, taking over for Michael Giacchino. So we have, as Pat said, a shorter list for production notes this time around, but it's a new film. More and more notes will be coming out, of course, about the production and over the course of the film's release. And with that, Pat, is there anything that you wanted to touch on before we start to go over more with why this film wasn't better?
Just a quick break as we hear from one of our sponsors. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. And now let's talk about this film. Number one, did they need Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling? This has been the big controversy about this movie.
Do you like Bill Hader?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, super talented guy.
I'm a big SNL fan, and he's part of one of my favorite casts on the show. Like you said, very talented.
Yeah, not just funny, but I think a legit great actor.
And funny enough, he didn't really get into acting until just, I'd say not later in life, but he got into it in his late 20s. So interesting enough for someone that didn't really start out with acting at a young age.
He, of course, played Fear. He was the voice of Fear in the first one. Mindy Kaling was the voice of Disgust. They were replaced on this one over the pay dispute, like you mentioned. Apparently, Pixar really lowballed them, offering them an alleged $100,000 each. I don't know if that's true, but that's what we've read. That is a pretty paltry sum. It's about 1% of what they gave to Amy Poehler.
Interestingly enough, I mean, if we think about if the studio is making cost-cutting decisions, of the characters that didn't have a ton of screen time in the first one, I think it was, I'd say, pretty calculated decision on where they could maybe replace the voice acting.
I think it's funny they cut the costs here because it's they still ended up with $175 million budget. It's way to go.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a good portion of that we can see in the animation and how it's evolved over time.
Oh, yeah. I have a quote here from Matthew Baloney of the Puck newsletter. He says, quote, "Going cheap on voice talent is becoming more common at Disney. I've heard Pixar people complain about the tightening purse strings and talent fees on recent Emmy winner Chippendale Rescue Rangers were laughably low," end quote. Puck reports that Rescue Rangers voice cast, which included John Mulaney and Andy Samberg, participated as a favor to the director, and Disney reportedly upped its offers to Hader and Kaling for this film, but they still opted against returning. And I gotta say, I don't think they were missed.
No, they didn't.
I love Bill Hader, but I actually think Tony Hale is a better voice for Fear.
So if any of our listeners recognize the name Tony Hale, of course, Tony Hale, I'd say his biggest claim to fame is going to always be his character on Arrested Development.
Buster
Bluth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think he has a better suited voice for Fear.
Yeah. And it was whether or not better suited, because I do think that Bill Hader has quite the range. You don't end up missing Bill Hader's performance from the first one. Tony Hale did a fine job.
Same thing with Mindy Kaling. I have no connection to her whatsoever, so I didn't miss her. I thought Liza Lapierre did a good job replacing her.
Damn.
Enough said there. The rest of the voice cast I thought were great. A lot of depth, a lot of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I think more than a lot of Pixar films, the right casting was key to this, especially when you are voicing an emotion, one specific emotion, and you have to be very specific in what you're hitting. Now, in this one, Amy Poehler had a lot more range to hit as Joy, and I thought she nailed it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's just part of the great writing that they have as well, that even though we know these characters from the first film, we have expectations of how they'll act. It's how do they naturally progress and grow, and the way that these actors can convey that. And I think, like you said, Amy Poehler really knocked it out of the park.
Who voices Riley? What's her name?
Riley's voice is played...
Kensington Talman?
Riley is played by...
Should probably have known that before I started recording this, but whatever.
I don't have it here. Oh, Kensington Talman. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Great job. I don't know anything about her, but does a great job.
Yeah. Really portrays the voice of someone who is just discovering puberty.
Riley's parents are, of course, voiced by Diane Lane and Kyle MacLachlan, two very well-known actors in their own right, especially Diane Lane in her day. Neither of them are voice actors. I think if anyone could have been replaced, it could have been them.
Much less of a role as well in the second film. They're a bit more front and center in the first one, but...
Yeah, they're important characters, but very much secondary characters.
Right. But always enjoyed the scenes that they were in. A lot of fun jokes.
Oh, yeah. Number 2 reason. Let's talk about the new characters. This is the big one, right?
Gosh.
There are 5 new emotions. We're going to, of course, mostly talk about anxiety.
I thought it was great. I feel like one of the things that I always struggle with when it comes to expectations, especially for, films like Inside Out, or just even when there's such a big film previous, is just how do you progress a story in a natural way? And like, how do you introduce new characters in a way that just doesn't feel organic? And I felt like these characters were just awesome.
I agree. I really liked Maya Hawke as the voice of anxiety. I thought she really nailed the manic, helpful, bossy, impulsive tone that worked for the character. You can do a lot of stuff with anxiety as an emotion too, right? You could have made a case that anxiety is just a part of fear. Because my initial reaction to it was like, well, isn't anxiety like the same thing as fear? And it's like, well, it's defined in the dictionary as a feeling of fear. But I think the puberty angle makes a lot of sense to introduce anxiety as a new emotion, because the age of Riley in this film, where she just turns 13, that really is when a lot of kids start to really experience what anxiety is. When you're a little kid, I'm not saying you can't have anxiety as a little kid, but anxiety as a little kid and anxiety as a teenager, I think, are two very different things. And this film was very assertive in how it points that out.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of the great things about this film is, if the film is about how emotions get more complex over time, you just touched on that. Fear can evolve. We start to see things like anxiety as we get older. And for a young person, how do you explain those feelings? And I feel like this film really displays that in a very well thought out way.
I thought it was brilliant writing how they portrayed the good and bad sides of anxiety too.
Yeah.
Because remember, when anxiety first essentially takes over for Joy, they're like, wow, you're doing a good job. Like, this is how you prepare yourself to deal with adversity. And everyone's like, good job, anxiety.
Yeah. Well, when you worry about everything, you're going to plan for everything.
Right. And then there's a flip side to that coin. You hyper focus on hypothetical scenarios and you start to get in your own head. And that's exactly what happened here. Great writing. It really is.
I love the animation room, trying to display the different outcomes of the scrimmage game.
Right, just really, really creative stuff. And I think the best part about this character and how it's written is they successfully made anxiety the antagonist without making her evil, which is not easy to do in this kind of film.
Yeah, and it is just like you just said. It's interesting because they're able to not they were able to do this film, but not have someone that's, quote unquote, the bad guy.
Yeah.
So that's very well done.
She had to push you, the audience, just far enough to where you root against her. But like you just said, you can't actually make her the bad guy because there has to be the balance at the end, which they pull off. You can't have a situation where you're now rooting against her by the climax of the film.
Which I think is just a very strong hallmark of Pixar, being able to tell complex stories, non-traditional storylines. Like, how do you not have like a proper antagonist in the story? So if this was just any other studio, it would have been easy just to make like Anxiety just a more traditional bad guy.
Right. Again, that's something the first film did well. The first film doesn't really have an antagonist.
Yeah, exactly. Same box.
It's just basically an adventure to complete a task. I'm not downplaying it, but okay. How much do you think Pixar had to pay the Muppets for Anxiety? Because it looks exactly like Animal from the Muppets, right?
I feel like it is inspired a bit. Now, they didn't pay anything because Disney owns the Muppets.
Of course they do.
So they were like, well, time to throw Animal in there.
Yeah, sure. Rest of the new emotions, right? Envy, I thought funny, but not a lot to do.
Yeah, just more of like a cute character. It does help round out, like, it is a very strong emotion, especially at that age, but didn't really like dive into it too much.
Embarrassment, I thought, was animated perfectly. This was the funniest one.
I loved Embarrassment. Also, just great development on Embarrassment's part too.
Yeah. The other one, ennui.
Ennui.
Ennui. A French word that combines the feeling of tiredness and boredom.
Is this every teenager?
I think so. Yeah. We've all been there. Again, not a lot to do, but I liked the concept of her controlling the board with the phone tablet thing. That was pretty funny.
I feel like her character definitely had a lot more than particularly Envy. I feel like her presence in general felt distinctly unique.
Yeah.
And especially considering like we touched on, this seemed like a very accurate portrayal of someone in their preteen/teen years.
I like how they kept shooing nostalgia away. Like, we'll see you in 10 years. That was pretty funny.
Yeah.
What about Mr. Pouchy?
Hilarious.
Yeah, it really was. It really was.
Especially the payoff with then Anger just shoving his arm down his throat.
Yeah. I think it could have been annoying, but Louis Black as Anger really saved it. Like the total lack of patience. I was really laughing. Speaking of Anger, we get a new side to him.
Yes.
Almost like a new version of the character. And again, clever writing. It makes total sense because how people manage their anger over time as they age and use it changes quite a bit. Think about how a child is angry. Is completely different from how a teenager is angry, which is completely different from how an adult is angry and how you channel that anger.
Well, I feel like all of the characters, for the most part, you see this very similar evolution. They even touch on suppressed emotions being in the jar.
Yes.
Which is just so well done. But when we see that development of the different emotions, like, how do things like joy evolve as we grow older? How do things like anger evolve as we grow older? And with that, a complex look at the nuance of each emotion, new and old. So I feel like introducing the new characters was great. I feel like you can look at a few sequels for Pixar and kind of think, doesn't feel quite as organic, but I think for Inside Out 2 it was very, very, well thought out.
Well, let's get into this then, because the next reason is the story. Let's examine the plot of this film. You can basically boil it down to this, right? We get new emotions. They get carried away. They cast out the old emotions. Things go haywire. The old emotions get back to set things straight. Maybe it gets, no pun intended, emotional, and we get a happy ending. I think very quickly you could see where this plot was going. I would say once they established that new emotions were coming, it was a predictable plot. However, I don't necessarily think that's a problem here, because what makes this film good is how you get to each plot point. We knew what was going to happen, just not how. I want to give a shout out to the director, Kelsey Mann. We don't often talk about directors when we're discussing animated films for whatever reason. I thought he did a great job with this story. I liked the premise. I think the concept of the self-belief and the dangers of classifying yourself as one thing versus another, very complex to distill in this kind of a film. And again, I thought really well written. The anxiety was really well portrayed, especially when Riley is basically having like an anxiety attack at the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to put this kind of thing into what is essentially a children's movie.
Yeah, and I feel like when we think of the first film and we think of the sequel, they're both coming of age films, right? And essentially when we think of the first one, my breakdown is it's a film about being able to accept your emotions as you grow older. The second one treads along that same path. And if we have expectations for knowing that it's about being able to better understand our emotions as we grow older, that they're more nuanced or more complex, I was a little worried, like, how do you kind of expand on that, or how do you make it feel unique and clear from the first film? And they did it, like you said, in a way that felt natural, in a way that was very well thought out as we move from like one portion of the plot to the next.
Yeah, like it's interesting to watch this film too for me, because like neither of us are the target audience.
No.
And I have to admit, I didn't care about any of the hockey stuff like whatsoever.
No.
That's like the real action's happening inside her mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
The inner mechanics of Riley's mind, I found extremely compelling. It has that Pixar charm. There was a lot of laughs in here. I think my favorite part was the jailbreak scene.
Oh, that was pretty hilarious.
What was the children's TV cartoon character? It was like Bloofy?
Bluefy, which was, it almost felt like a bit of Blue's Clues.
Yeah, I can see that. That made me laugh. The Final Fantasy inspired video game character, that cracked me up.
Lance / Blade.
Yes. And then the concept of the secret, right? The dark secret.
Yeah.
That was just really clever stuff. And again, shout out to the writers and Kelsey Mann again. They knew not to spend too much time in jail. We're out of there in 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Smart. In a very funny way. Did you stay for the end credit scene?
No, like very, very, very end?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Missed it.
So Joy goes back to bring Dark Secret out. And it turned out the secret was that Riley burned a hole in the rug when she was younger, right?
Yeah.
But Joy thought it was going to talk about the time that she peed in the pool, which made Dark Secret shut itself back in the vault. It was really funny.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I feel like it's the comedy in this film too just felt it felt like Pixar. It had that like Pixar quality. It's hard to think about when I think of DreamWorks style comedy like Despicable Me, which is a bit more just aimed at kids in a way that's very on the nose, like dumb jokes, fart jokes, things like that. You don't get that in this film.
No, this had a different kind of charm to it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to see it again because, again, I just saw it in the theaters once.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things here and there. The anxiety is drinking.
Yes, there's a lot of little details in here. The question about this kind of sequel, right, is always going to be like, did the first one need a sequel? I don't know. I thought it was a complete film. But you mentioned earlier the word organic.
Mm-hmm.
If you are going to do a sequel, they chose the best approach. Puberty, the early teenager stuff, that's a very logical step. It's a logical step, but it's a different take than the first one. The first one is basically Joy learning that happiness and joy are not the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she has to figure out how to accept sadness. And then with this one, you get the whole anxiety piece, which I felt was a different enough approach, which is, we talk about this a lot, right? This is what I ultimately want out of a sequel. Do something different from the first one. Yeah. This is not Incredibles 2 or Finding Dory to me. I like those films fine. They're fine movies. But this is far more of a natural sequel to me than something like Incredibles 2, which we've covered on this podcast a while ago, right? And my main problem with Incredibles 2 is that it is a carbon copy of the first one and really doesn't take the characters or their story in any new kind of direction. Same thing with Finding Dory, right? It's just the inverse of, somebody's missing and we have to go find them. This felt like a natural progression of the story of Riley's life.
Which is, it's amazing because it's very easy to say, logical step, but only the expectation, of course, would be Pixar can do it well, and they absolutely did it great, right?
Yeah. I do think they should quit while they're ahead, though. I am sure they will make a sequel to this, but I don't know how they would do it because you have the puberty alarm go off in this, right? They didn't
Mhm.
explore some of the biggest, most important parts of puberty, right? And I
Right.
understand why. A lot of that stuff would be almost impossible to put into a children's movie, right? The
Yeah.
next emotional step in Riley's life is content that Pixar would probably not want to cover.
That's very, very fair to say, but we'll see if there's an Inside Out 3 and maybe they decide to cover a different character other than Riley.
Yeah, like Riley gets a sibling.
Or time jump. Who knows?
Yeah.
We're not writers at Pixar.
That's a good point, actually. It could be Riley in college, or Riley has a family of her own, a big time jump.
Or Joy decides that she needs to compete in one more big race because she wants to be able to capture the championships of her past. Oh, no, wait, that was Cars 3.
I don't think I've seen Cars 3.
You don't need to.
I did. I don't know. I don't know how different it was from Cars 2. I don't know, whatever. Does Pixar have a sequel problem?
Yes and no. I feel like it's they've shown that they can do sequels better than the rest, and then they showed they can absolutely fall into the same traps.
I don't think they do. I don't have a problem with Pixar doing sequels, and I never understood why anyone does. Sequels were part of the movie industry long before Pixar started doing them.
But at the same time, I think it's because people hold Pixar in such high regard, especially with their track record with how they were doing sequels, that I think a lot of folks know that sequels can be very, very hit or miss. And when we look at some of the sequels of that Pixar has put out, some of them do shine more than the others. I mean, for every Toy Story 2, there's also a Cars 3 and 2.
It's fair. I think it was either Lasseter or Pete Docter that said like we're gonna keep doing more sequels because it basically keeps the lights on. So get used to it. And
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. And there's demand for some of these sequels, right? Like think about the demand and the hype for Incredibles 2. We
I
were
mean,
waiting for that for so long.
it's why we had a Toy Story 4.
Ugh. Well, we're getting Toy Story 5, right?
Oh, absolutely. And we're getting another Finding Nemo. But I will say that like there's I get it. The financial aspect of it, the sequels for these very strong IPs are gonna draw people in to
Of
watch the
course.
movies and make money.
Yeah.
But just the part of me that just appreciates the medium of film says, no, don't touch it, like let it be there. Like it's already just such a great story. Why continue it? But then they end up continuing some stories and they show like why they're a great studio because they invest in things like well thought out character development, well thought out plots and story, fresh takes and jokes. But I know that they can't always do that.
And it's not like they have abandoned doing original movies to just make sequels. Not the case at all. Look at Onward, Soul, Luca, Turning
Mhm.
Red, Elemental, the upcoming Elio. These
The
aren't
good
cash grabs.
the Good Dinosaur. And
Right.
yeah, and we have to look at those films, and while not all of them may be hits, this is still a studio that has a very high batting average.
Under normal circumstances, a bunch of those may have been hits, though. I don't think you can just call them bombs because of the pandemic, right? Like it's an unfair
Mhm.
way of looking at them. And like, yes, they technically speaking, a lot of these were box office bombs, but the circumstances of the pandemic really do matter.
Yeah, I think like when I think of just what are lower tier Pixar films, they're not all sequels, right? Some of
No,
them are newer concepts that just didn't do as great. I mean, Brave, we haven't talked about Brave. The Good Dinosaur, not again another one that just didn't really resonate. And I feel like that's one of the hallmarks of Pixar is relatability across all their films. You could be any age and there's an aspect to it that will be relatable.
well, I was thinking about this too. So, what would you say DreamWorks is Pixar's biggest competitor, or Illumination, maybe?
Yeah, that's definitely at least the US contemporary. I'd say internationally, probably Studio Ghibli.
You think they have a different audience? They have a way more mature audience.
When I think of animated films, I do think like Pixar and Ghibli are way up there.
I don't think if Studio Ghibli is making kids movies though. They make for an older audience.
They no, I mean if you look at what they release and if you look at even like their history of like what they've released, you see a lot of parallels with Pixar films that are released for kids that have a lot of strong relatability that adults can appreciate. Maybe a bit of their more recent releases, like definitely a bit geared even more towards older kids. We're thinking like Princess Mononoke.
Yeah.
But if you think of films like My Neighbor Totoro, Wind Rises, of course, very popular Spirited Away, these are films that are aimed at, or these are films that are really just for, kids and adults with nuanced themes and great plot and storytelling, and fantastic animation, which, I put Pixar in that category.
They don't do sequels at all, do they?
Not really. I mean, some spiritual successor sequel,
right? But not
yeah,
no.
but nothing. But you're never gonna see like Spirited Away 2.
DreamWorks does way more sequels.
Despicable Me 8.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like 4 times as many. I mean, we're talking. Look at this rundown: 4 Shrek movies plus the spin-offs, 3 Madagascar movies plus a spin-off, 4 Kung Fu Pandas, 3 How to Train Your Dragons, 2 Croods, 3 Trolls, 2 Boss Babies. It's like all they do is sequels.
And we still haven't gotten a Prince of Egypt 2. Come on now.
There's a prequel to Prince of Egypt, though, remember? No one remembers. Yeah, nobody remembers it. And this is a question, right? How many Pixar sequels are better than the original?
I feel like it's such a stark contrast to Pixar that even when we look at like DreamWorks sequels, they have actually been very underrated, though. I will say that. I don't know if you saw Puss in Boots: The Last Wish.
Nope, didn't say it.
That's actually a really, really great film that touches on, again, very complex emotions and great storytelling. That's a fun one. It really is a good one.
Maybe one day. Pixar sequels, the only one I can think of that I liked better than the first one was maybe Toy Story 2.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's an all-time great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's one of the best sequels ever made. So is Toy Story 3. I don't know if I like Toy Story 3 better than the first one. I mean, it's a great sequel, though.
Yeah, it's a great sequel. Not quite like high up there for me compared to Toy Story 1 and 2. I mean, even when I think of like this film of Inside Out 2 compared to Inside Out, I think I personally like Inside Out 2 more. I feel like even when I think of the film itself, I don't think you really needed to see the first one to be able to appreciate and understand the second one.
No, you did not. They give a nice recap in the beginning, or Joy gives a nice recap in the beginning. You don't have to see the first one. And this is something else that I like about a sequel is you don't necessarily have to tie the story to the first one. Think about how dependent Incredibles 2 is on the first one, where it's almost like one giant movie. This, not so much.
It's true.
I think I'm with you, Anton. I think I enjoyed this better than the first one. I'm not saying it's a better movie necessarily, because I would want to see that. I would want to see it again before I make that kind of statement, but I for sure felt this was better paced than the first one. The first one is a little slow in some moments.
And this one,
zippy.
I just felt it
moves right along.
But it didn't feel rushed.
No.
Like there wasn't a moment where the characters were just walking along and we think, okay, where's this scene going? The punchlines were effective. The jokes came and went and moved the plot along together. We didn't really have empty scenes.
No, I thought it was breakneck. The action doesn't really let up. It's so well paced.
And I think this is just part of how well done it is when they do throw in gags, it doesn't feel too shoved in like they did even I loved it when they had the callback to the first film where they have the gum like jingle from the first film.
Yes.
And it's just so hilarious, but like it's like a split second, but just enough that you can appreciate it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff like that. I felt like, I mean, as usual, the animation was, I thought, superb. Ton of color.
Well, color and texture. And I feel like, I feel like that was what was really impressing me. It was just how alive everything felt. Animation has really evolved so much. It's really impressive.
It's ever evolving. And you can see they spent a lot of money to animate this because nothing felt cheaped out to me. And you mentioned world building, I think, before we started recording, how good the world building is in these two films. The infrastructure of the mind, it's really well put together. You get a good sense of how everything is working and functioning. That's what's so cool about this world that they have created inside of Riley's mind.
And just to take a step back, this is a film for kids, or at least kids should be able to consume this and relate to it and understand it. And I feel like these are not easy concepts, trying to explain nuanced emotions or trying to explain how does the brain work or what is a suppressed emotion. And it just does it in a way that's, again, very digestible, but not condescending. It doesn't talk down to the viewer.
I liked the score by Andrea Datzman.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better than Michael Giacchino? Probably not. I mean, she did a good job of building on what he composed for the first one. It's a solid score.
There was a lot, especially, I mean, part of it is, I saw the first one recently to prepare for the second one, and you can see a lot of similarities between the scores.
You know what this movie is? It's a perfect example of why something should be animated and stay animated, and why something should be live action and there shouldn't necessarily be crossover. This is an example of something that only works in an animated format. Think how goofy this could be in live action.
I'm trying not to. But it's the advantage of the medium, right? Being able to be creative in that space. And like you said, we may not have the big budget to be able to create like a big sarcasm scene in live action.
Right.
But heck, we can animate
it's
it.
Sarcasm. There's so many bits. I really do need to see this again. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel like it is just with Pixar film, or it is a great Pixar film, and this is Pixar, where I do get like a teary eye because of scenes that could come off as cheesy, end up feeling very genuine, sentimental, and again relatable. And it's just so well done how things like being able to embrace these nuanced emotions and these complex emotions gets communicated in the film.
The way that anxiety takes over her mind, and, spoiler alert, when she's breaking into the coach's office to steal the notebook.
Oh.
At first you're like, well, why would she do something that stupid? And you're like, wait, of course. Like, if you're if you're letting anxiety make all your decisions, then of course you're going to make poor decisions. And then when she has the anxiety attack in the penalty box during the scrimmage, you feel that, man. I mean, I've never experienced an anxiety attack like that, but it's a very difficult thing to portray in a children's movie, animated, and they did such a great job with it.
Also, they just never had to say it out loud, like what's happening.
Right.
They just really they just showed. And I feel like being able to show that natural progression of what's occurring, how are the characters being able to like really work out the conflict. And then you have such a cathartic release with just naturally being able to then accept what they can and cannot control.
They save all of the one-liner exposition stuff for the jokes. And for the emotional stuff, they let the visuals do the storytelling.
Which we've touched on. Being able to show and not tell is a great sign of a great movie.
Before we wrap this up, let's rank our Pixar films.
Okay.
Because I feel like this is a popular thing to do is, rank your Pixar films.
Let's tier them, yeah.
I'll give you my top tier first. This is in no particular order, but this is what I consider to be the Mount Rushmore of Pixar. And I'm going to give you more than 4, so it's not really Mount Rushmore. Whatever. The Incredibles, Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2, Coco, Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, and Up.
Yep. Yeah. For me, it's Toy Story 2, Toy Story, Coco, Ratatouille, Up, The Incredibles, and Monsters, Inc.
Not Finding Nemo.
And Finding Nemo, sorry.
Okay. I was going to say, you got to have Finding Nemo in there.
Yeah.
Second tier for me, Toy Story 3, Monsters, Inc., WALL-E, Soul, Inside Out, The Incredibles 2, or Incredibles 2.
Okay. For me, I have to put there, like, WALL-E, Finding Dory. I really like Soul, and then A Bug's Life.
Oh, by the way, I think I'm going to put Inside Out 2 in the second tier with the first one.
Oh, man.
Not to spoil my rating on this, but
I
like this. I really like this film. My third tier is, and this is going to be the bottom tier, but again, this doesn't mean these are bad movies. Monsters University, Finding Dory, A Bug's Life, all the Cars films, Toy Story 4, and Brave.
For me, it's literally the rest. And it's just things that we didn't mention, of course, like films like Lightyear, The Good Dinosaur. I didn't really like. I just didn't love them. Onward, I think, had a lot more heart than those films, but still just not quite the same level or relatability that I enjoyed from a Pixar film.
Wait,
Yeah.
did you put Elemental in any of the tiers?
Oh, sorry. If I was gonna put Elemental in tier, it'd be in the middle tier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, to your point, there's a few I haven't seen. Good Dinosaur, Onward, Luca, Turning Red, Lightyear. I haven't seen any of those. They're all on our list
Yeah.
to cover eventually, so I will see them at some point. So,
well, I think that we have some very fair assessments. I don't think that there would be a ton of people that would disagree with us. I don't think either of us like really hate any of the top tier Pixar films, which makes sense. That's why they're top tier Pixar films.
Right. And yeah, like, by the way, everything I have in the top tier, I'm sure you agree. Like, we're talking about some of my all-time favorite movies.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, is Pixar has such a high pedigree that there was no way we were going to miss covering this one because very high expectations.
Absolutely. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, one last thing before we go, did we like it? What was your favorite gag or joke from the film?
Oh, definitely the Mr. Pouchy thing, because it was the different animated format and it didn't look dumb with the 3D. They actually successfully incorporated it.
Yeah, no, for me, I would have to go with, yes, the Mr. Pouchy bluesy scene was very hilarious. But I actually really like a lot of the subtle, like, more quiet gags, or even just there is a scene very early on in the film. The parents are dropping them off at camp, and just the dad gives the mom a look like, and what are we up to this exciting weekend with the kids away? It's a big weekend. Just raises his eyebrows. It's just a fun little innuendo that would just totally go over a kid's head. But as an adult, it's just funny.
Also, speaking of the parents, anytime you see their inner mind, the characters in their minds, they're always funny.
Yeah. And then just a fun little like touch is just how at the end we get another inner look at their minds and you see, oh, they also have anxiety, like,
of course,
as well. So I think it's just for us it almost just seems like, oh, that's just a natural, like, yeah, that makes sense. But then for a kid to just kind of see that, you can kind of put together one on one, like, oh yeah, parents also feel that too. So very well thought out film, and hilarious, touching, and quite enjoyable.
So, Anton, did you like it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed this film. I think I'm gonna go ahead and just like say it. I like this film more than I like the first film. And I've touched on it before where I don't think we really need to see the first one to understand and appreciate the second one. And I think it's because it's dealing with more nuanced and complex emotions that I liked it. But also in general, I feel like it's such a complete story and just so well paced. The score is great, and there's just so much heart that I feel like this one particularly resonated with me more than the first Inside Out did. I think that I want to see it a few more times to say, like, how is this like particularly different from the first film? How is it like? But at the same time, like, it has all the aspects of what we would say is a great film. So I think that this film is in a really great place in terms of where it's trending towards, like, the box office. It has great critical reception, and I feel like it's very well deserved. I think that it's one where people will be very happy to see, especially, and hopefully they agree with us, that it's a fun sequel. It's a very well thought out sequel, and definitely worth the time going to the theater to watch. For me, that this film comes in at a B+.
I swear we don't share our ratings with each other before we do this. I feel the same. I liked it better than the first one. I thought the story concept was something that appealed to me more. I thought it was better paced than the first one. Now, to be fair, like you said, I want to see this again. This is everything that I wanted out of a Pixar sequel, which is an insanely high bar. I'm a little cooler on the first one than I think most people are. Again, I like the first one. I would probably give the first one like a B minus, something like that, maybe a B. I like the first one. I think it's a very good movie. This is, apart from, I would say, Toy Story 2 and 3, I think the best Pixar sequel I've ever seen. It's funny, it's sweet, it's charming, it's got great characters. The story felt very natural to me, which is really what I want out of a sequel. And it does something different. I would absolutely recommend this. I have a feeling this is going to be a hit. I hope this is a hit. As soon as this is on Disney Plus, I will be watching it again. Pixar did a great job with this. I'm right there with you at a B+. I think this is a great movie. I don't want to say I was pleasantly surprised by this because I figured the first one's good. I didn't expect this to be bad, but
yeah,
I was not expecting to like it more than the first one, and I did.
Yeah, it was, and I know what you mean. Like, you didn't expect it to be bad, but maybe you didn't expect it to be exceptional. And
yeah,
I think that is pleasantly surprised.
You know, this season's turning out pretty good for us ratings wise. We're dishing out a bunch of B- and above.
Well, don't worry. I'm sure there's going to be quite. I know a few of I know the films that we're going to be covering, and we're going to be pretty harsh to a few of those.
It's like, don't worry, we have a Steven Seagal movie to bring this down.
Don't worry, we have a not so great Wesley Snipes film to cover.
It's going to be a fun discussion. Yeah, rewatching it was a chore.
Oh, I feel like it's so ritualistic whenever I watch a Blade film, just because I have to put on like this like hat of, oh, like we're back in the world of Blade. It's moody, it's dark, and it gets progressively sillier with each film.
It does. Well, that is it for Inside Out 2. Definitely check this film out in theaters because this is a real treat. And we will see you next week on Why Wasn't It Better? It's the Time Machine.
All right, let's do it.
And of course, if you're a Patreon, you already have access to that episode. So anyway, take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.